tonight we have Sid Harrell. She was at Bolt Peters as the VP of Research. She's currently investing her energies in things that answer the question, why be evil by not working at Facebook and doing something else? She's involved in civic projects that in part involve mentoring for the Code Academy, or Code for America, sorry about that. And she's also been doing civic projects with Dana Chisnell, who was the October speaker. So rather than listen to me, here's your chance to listen to Sid.
All right. Thank you again. Cold January evening and all that. Glad to see you. So right now, a lot of people in this room have probably had a smartphone for a number of years, but the Pew Project on the Internet in American Life has been tracking the penetration of cell phones and smartphones over the last few years. And their most recent report, which is September, so this is before iPhone 5, this is before the recent holiday season, said that we've now got 45% of all American adults owning a smartphone. And that's up from 35% at the same time in 2011. And amongst adults 18 to 29, we're looking at 66%. And also among more affluent adults, those earning over about $75,000, so not hugely affluent for this area, but those folks who are making enough money to pay for a data plan are really invested in having one of these little gizmos with them. So as researchers, this should be pretty interesting. And I was actually just reminded on the way in by Kathleen Watson that she had taken a class from me 3 years ago, and I said straight up, we don't know what to do about mobile as of yet. So the exciting thing about right now is that this has been going on long enough, and we've been experimenting with it, that we have some ideas of what to try and how to go forward, and some of the more exciting capabilities are starting to be visible. So let me introduce myself a little better. I'm Sid Harrell. I'm a UX researcher. I have two major tools in my toolkit, and each of them has a whole lot of incarnations. Empathy is the most important one, and duct tape, which goes with a good sense of humor, is the next one. So that's why I am out doing mobile research as an early adopter. I thought you might like to hear about my first ever mobile study. This was in 2007, so before this was really happening, and I was with Bolt Peters, which was a firm that prided itself on pretty much doing anything that a client asked in order to solve a genuine research problem. And this particular client called us up and said, we're making a concept car. This was a car manufacturer, and they said, we want to understand what people are doing with all of these devices that we hear that they're bringing in their cars. But we don't think they'll tell us the truth in a survey. They're going to say, no, I never text while I'm driving. I don't futz with the iPad, right? Could you guys figure out how to actually find out what they're doing? And so we decided that, well, you couldn't really create a lab that was a fake car. That wasn't going to be realistic. And so we would have to do this as a field study. And we went out, and we worked with 20 different participants. And I was not on the away team on this one. I was back at the office helping the tech work. And we followed them on a trip that they had planned to do. And we had a person in the back seat of the car with a fancy camera, and a person in the front seat of the car with a laptop with a webcam that was broadcasting to the client's observers on 2 continents. And the trips would last anywhere from 15 minutes to 40 minutes. And we saw a lot of interesting behavior related to the phones. People are lying about what they will do with their phone while they're in their car. I'm sure nobody's shocked by that. Thank you, yes. So we had categories in our photo set: no hands, 2 hands, 1 hand on the wheel. But we also saw fascinating information about people's relationships with their kids and people's relationships with their pets. We ended up with several pet trips. And we started to think, well, this is curious. They asked us about mobile phones, but we're learning a lot about what people do with the people and animals and things that they care about in the context of a car. How come we never thought of doing this until someone told us they had a mobile study for us? I will also tell you that the technical complexity involved in this particular study was ridiculous. And this is one reason that I'm fearless about other mobile studies, is because if you've done this, setting up a walk around in a store doesn't sound that insane. So one thing I'll just mention that we're mostly going to leave out of the equation is a typical lab setup. I figure a lot of you, if you're researchers, are probably pretty familiar with the idea of sitting down in a lab with a sled, making sure that you can see the phone and so forth. I will offer a couple of tips for avoiding the sled. A comfortable chair and an over-the-shoulder camera attached to a little boom will get you out of having the sled on a person's phone. And so what I often do as a pro tip is bring a armchair on which a person can rest their hand comfortably into the lab, set up a little camera, something unobtrusive like a flip that can see their camera. And if I'm working with a person's own phone, which is something that I think is a good idea when you can, I ask them to let me see their phone for just a minute when I come in and adjust the brightness. And that's really the one important technical thing to do in that setting, is to make sure that you're capturing the video. If you're taking video, which is by no means a requirement. So when we came up with the topic of fearless mobile research, I thought, well, what is it that's scaring us anyway? And I coach a lot of researchers, and when they're staying up late the night before a study and they're worried, it's not because, oh, I don't know how to have the conversation with people. It's not because it seems like we're going to talk about some really personal habit topic or something that's going to be awkward. Usually what is frightening them, this is an anecdotal evidence, is the dang recording going to work? Is the broadcast going to work? Is the prototype going to work? Is all of the technology and logistics associated with this study going to happen? Is there going to be a traffic jam that's going to prevent my participants from showing up? And mobile adds a whole nother layer on top of this, partly because it's new, and partly just because it's out and about. It's in an environment a lot of the time that we can't control. What I'd like to do, if you have a minute, I'm also going to post this on Twitter right now for those of you who would prefer to link to it. It's just a little survey to see if I'm right about what keeps researchers up at night. So you're welcome to take it on your phone. What I think it boils down to, in terms of being afraid about the logistics and so forth, is that there's really, I keep doing that, I'm sorry. I like to walk, I'll stay over here. There are two pieces that are not study design. You know, once you've decided what you want to do and what kind of conversation you want to have and what kind of results you want to collect so that you can do something with them later, well, then the rubber meets the road when you have to actually deliver the two of those things. You have to get the response, you have to provide the prompt. So with mobile, looking at apps on here that you might be the target that you're researching. There also might be other targets that you can research using this as a research platform. So let's jump into some of the possibilities that we have that we probably didn't have a year ago. So let's say that you are looking at how people can work with QR code applications within a store environment. And this is a very unnatural little video that was pre-made as part of a pre-flight test. And the actual participants, as it turned out, were not nearly as good as at holding their phones at the unnatural angle that you need to do to snap the QR codes in this flat-faced display, which was the way that this particular retailer had always displayed their tags. Some of the people knew this, the clients that were involved, and they said, well, you know, we'd like to figure out how to get real video of people walking around in the store. So the simplest thing, kind of an adaptation of what you might do for any field study where you're going to have a camera and you're going to walk around. It's hard to set up a mobile field study where you don't walk around, so simple little things like that tripod are critical pieces of the toolkit. But probably this year I'd have an iPhone on top of that instead of a flip cam. I really like this picture because it shows real duct tape and it shows a webcam, which is then able to broadcast this to someone who's remote, who's not part of the direct observing team on site. But now, this same mobile thing that we're talking about researching can take just about as good a video as a flip cam for just about as long, and you can screw the same kind of little tripod into the bottom of it. So all I have to do to adjust my practice to the fact that what the person is actually using is a mobile phone here is make sure I've got the brightness, make sure I've got simple video settings to capture what they're doing, but it's just like a field study. I'm going to play a little video. So this is a new one. Came out a little earlier this year. It's called UX Recorder. And this recreates a usability study, basically, where you might have, in a traditional setup, 2 cameras, one pointed at the person's face, screen recording happening. This uses the front-facing camera of a phone and also screen recording as long as you're on a mobile website and as long as this is iOS. So one thing about the stage that we're at, where basically what we have a lot of clever hacks, and we're starting to get some real robust tools that we can use to expand our practice, is that there's restrictions on them. But on the other hand, this is pretty cool. This is basically a little usability session that I did for myself using the Cooks Illustrated website, which has a nice mobile website. So, hi, so this is Sid doing a quick session with cooksillustrated.com, which is one of my favorite websites on the computer, but I haven't done a lot of using it on a mobile site. So one of my guesses is that I'm going to need to log in. It looks like I got into a category here without totally intending to. Not sure about the pink bean and lima bean dip with parsley, so let me hit the back button. And what I really want to do is log in, because this thing is not going to show me any recipes without logging in, I don't believe. Okay. Okay. Email address. Sid at Sid Harrell. So I don't like hearing my own voice recorded any better than anybody. And I also think this gives you just an awesome angle on your face. But this recreates that basic capability that we all rely on to be able to take a session of a person using something, see their face, see their gestures, and record that for future use. So big ups to the people who created this. It's kind of an expensive app. It runs about $60. And it has to be plugged in, your phone does, while you are recording a session with this, because it draws a lot of power in order to run the camera and the recording at the same time. However, pretty useful for doing the same kind of thing that we're used to. So this hopefully doesn't sound scary. This is actually us getting tools to do the kind of work that we are comfortable doing. This is a brilliant little hack, one of my very favorites, at least publicized, if not discovered, by Jen Downs of MailChimp. And she was in a position where she needed to do remote sessions, and she needed to do them with phones and tablets. And as everyone knows, there's really not good screencasting from phones and tablets. And in desperation, as it often happens, she discovered that if you run a GoToMeeting session on a laptop and you set your participant in the correct position, you can just spin the laptop around and have them hug it with their phone in front of them, and you will get a very nice clear view of the screen of the mobile device. So you can basically run it a lot like you would run a remote session on a website. Also, very cool, clever hack. We need more. GoToMeeting has recently started to allow you to broadcast from tablets, but not phone yet. So in GoToMeeting 5.4, you can be the presenter from an iPad or another tablet device, which gets us a good bit farther with just being able to do regular usability. Delight is an interesting model where if you're actually building the app, you can integrate a little piece of code from their system, and then you can decide which users you would like to observe. And you'll be able to record the user session via the app directly. So this is the one iOS thing that works for apps. That is direct observation of this sort. This is really cool. It's a little bit of a headache to implement if you are not super sophisticated with code, but this is the kind of straight up feedback that you wouldn't think you could have gotten from a mobile phone a year ago. So some of the applications that you might be using for other types of usability are now developing into mobile versions. Usabilla, if you're not familiar with it, and if you've ever wondered, what could I do with screenshots on a phone, is an application that lets people click or tap on parts of the screen in response to questions. Really what the questions are is completely up to you. I have used it for many, many different applications. Where would you click to find X is the obvious one, but some of the other really interesting ones are, what's the first thing that draws your eye on this screen? Which part of this would you share with someone? Which part of this would you want to delve further into? All of those can be assessed on the mobile with this particular app. It also lets people leave brief little comments, and it provides you with a really pretty heat map, which I find is particularly useful if you're doing research for a client. So one of the questions that I often get asked when I'm talking about mobile research is, how many devices do I need to test on? Do I need to do both iOS and Android? How many different flavors of Android? Opinions vary a lot on this, and I think that by and large, if you hit an iOS and an Android, you are going to be okay, unless you're doing more of a QA type of test. And if you're doing a QA type of test, the nice thing is there are some really great institutions, little companies that are ready to help you. So has anybody used Mob for Hire or Mob Test? Nobody? Has anybody used a local device lab where they keep one of everything? Nice. Which one? Cool. Yeah, so this.
You need to repeat the answer.
The device lab in Austin, was it? Oakland, thank you. So yeah, so there's a device lab in Oakland. There are a couple of companies in this area that specialize in devices. Otivo in San Francisco is very much oriented around finding and keeping the correct sets of devices that are current. Mob Test and Mob for Hire run sort of panels of people who have particular setups that they will test your app on. And it's very useful for QA type of testing, but if what you're trying to find out is, well, how does this fit into someone's life? Something beyond, are the clicks working? Is the flow appropriate? I don't believe, and I know this is a little bit controversial, I don't believe that you need to test with every single device and every single implementation. The other things that we do, right, when we're testing not on mobile, we test with things that aren't done yet, because who wants to test only after something is done? And we use screenshots, and we use comps, and we throw up quick prototypes that you just click through in one path, and we do paper prototypes. What happens to all of this when we're talking about mobile? Not that much, and this is one of my favorite clever hacks that's out there. The Post-it is almost exactly the width of your typical smartphone. And in fact, there are a few companies making little Post-it templates that have the outline of the smartphone on it and the basics of its buttons. But in a pinch, you can stick these to the screen in a sequence and have yourself a paper prototype that works really effectively for testing. I love this. I was also just on a mobile study in December where the prototype didn't get ready. And what the team decided to do about it was to push the screenshots out as an album and place it on a test device and allow participants to swipe through as if it was one of those click-through prototypes that we make on the web where, wherever you click goes to the next logical step. So heck yes, we can do all of these things. I don't think anyone needs to be afraid of a classic usability study on a mobile device. The tricky bits are that yes, it adds an extra layer of technical complexity. It's very personal. And aside from the technical, that means that using a lab device or your phone for someone has a little more implication than using a lab computer. Because I've got a lot of settings on here, and I've got a lot of photos of my 8-year-old. And it's got a lot of interruptions that I've designed it to have, that it's reminding me that I'm supposed to go on this errand after work. All of these things are part of the context of my use. And so if I have a lab device with the app, it's okay for certain usability tasks. But probably if I'm the researcher, I'm going to ask somebody to bring in their own phone. Well, the things that happen when you're working with people's own devices are they forget them. They bring them in at 5% of charge. They don't pre-install something, perhaps, if you've been able to ask them to do that. And so all that means is that your plan for testing has to include a few B's and maybe a C or two. So yes, you have a backup device. I usually include chargers for all of the phones that we're expecting within my kit. I space the sessions a little farther apart than I would space web sessions because one thing we know, like I said at the beginning, is that we'll need to futz with the settings and make sure we've got the brightness right so that the cameras will pick up what's actually happening on the person's screen. And we also might need to install something or place something on there. It's just a little bit, so. So this, I think, is a far more rich and interesting question to talk about as well, because we're almost there with usability. I mean, some of these apps are hacks, but we've got them. We're able to do these things. What if it's past that? What about the things that we found out when we were driving around in cars with people about their pets and their kids and how they felt about their cars and what kind of trash they keep on the floor?
Yeah.
So the interesting thing is I think the mobile phone is even better for this kind of research. And I think it's in fact a really important advance in our ability to do this. And the thing that inspired me after that first mobile study to start thinking about this was a study that began in 2008 or 2009. A student, postdoctoral student called Matthew Killingworth at Harvard decided to study happiness in America. Have a bigger topic than that, right? And the way that he decided to do it was a method called experience sampling. And the iPhone being relatively new, he decided to make his study available to anybody with an iPhone. Has anybody seen this work before of his? Okay. So the idea was you would get a text message with a link a couple of times a day. And what you would be asked to report was, how happy are you right now? And what are you doing? And who are you with? And they promised quite an interesting little reward, which was, if you kept it up for 2 or 3 weeks, they would send you a summary of what makes you happy. So, who are you happy when you're with them? What are you happy when you're doing it? Which is a really cool and interesting reward, and I and several other researchers I knew jumped on this. We thought it was a fascinating research model. We thought the reward was really cool, and I don't know one who finished their 2 weeks back in 2008. Because it was so painful to fill out a web form on an iPhone 3GS or 3G if you were not on one of the fastest connections around, that it was really hard to get there. But he's persisted. And he's got a website called thehappinessproject.org where you can see what he's found over several years of asking regular people, skewed somewhat to the population of people that have smartphones, to report on when they're happy, who they're with, and what they're doing, which is about the most abstract project you can imagine. But this allows him to reach into people's lives, because everyone who said they brought a smartphone with them tonight, I bet you haven't been without it very much in the last 24 hours. Anyone?
How far is it with that?
2 feet. In fact, one thing we discovered in a study last year that was about reading news in general was that a lot of people pick up the smartphone from the nightstand before they're out of bed. Smartphone before slippers. So this is something that's really woven into the fabric of people's lives, and if you're doing an abstract topic like happiness, it has enormous potential to just check in and say, hey. So back in that Pew study about how many people have smartphones and how many people have feature phones and what they're all doing with them. The other thing that was interesting was that what people do more than anything else is text and take photographs. Might be some outliers here, but if you think about the preponderance of things that you do, those are 2 really important activities for almost everybody. And those are 2 really useful activities for reporting. So if we back up here, the cool thing about these, they're a really interesting way to provide research prompts. They're a fantastic way to collect research responses because there are so many different things that it could be. So it could be text, it could be a quick answer to a web form, it could be a photograph. Please take a photograph of the next bus you're on. Could be a video, it could be an audio recording, it could be calling into a number. There are any number of possibilities to use these to answer research questions. And some people are taking advantage. So this is actually one of the cross-platform apps, and I have some critiques of it on the experience level of what it's like to be a participant. I try everything out as a participant before I'll put my participants into it. But it's designed to do exactly this kind of research, things like diary studies and longitudinal experience. So people receive a mission, as they call it. Your mission is to do this. And it can include, going to a particular place, snapping a screenshot, taking a photo, writing up what you think about something, and all of it just comes back and gets collected. You can either recruit your own participants or you can use a panel that they have. I'm always in favor of recruiting your own. With mobile, you're up against the technology a bit, but it's still, I think, a really smart idea to find the people that are the right people for your study. So what would you do with an experience sampling study? What other kinds of questions could you hit? I don't think we would want to ask people to text us from their cars, but a lot of the things that we found out about during that study driving around in the cars could be addressed through something like this. And there's another really beautiful little app called Blurb Mobile, which is a funny, interesting little half pivot from Blurb, the book company. Has anybody used Blurb Mobile? Not mobile, okay. This link here is, and I also just sent that tweet out, it's the second link in the tweet, is a story, as they call it, that I made about my commute to a conference earlier this summer. And it's the easiest way that I've seen to pull together a multimedia experience. So you can do snap audio recordings, you can snap pictures, you can do snap video recordings, you can add captions to everything, and then you can string it all together and reorder it and so forth, and anywhere between 3 and 20 items turn into this little story, which you can then view on your phone. And it's another potential way, if you think about, if you want to do one of the more advanced kinds of ethnographic research, if you want to send out a cultural probe, if you want to look into people's feelings about, being in a medical setting where they're sitting around waiting and might have their phone with them, we can do that now. And these are settings where it would be really difficult to reach people under ordinary circumstances, to figure out how would you get next to enough people. And if it's applications where people are traveling, which is a lot of what we spend time on these days, if I'm walking around the city, if I am finding things to do if I am running into civic problems that I want to report. I'm probably going to reach for my phone before I do anything else. And if there's a way that I can connect with someone who's in that situation and saying, hey, in the last hour, have you happened to encounter any potholes or bumps or missing stop signs that you wanted to report? Did you do anything about that? I think probably text message prompts are what we'll be using for a while, with or without links, because that's the easiest way to get people, and it comes right in. And interestingly, also from Pew, we are 50-50 right now on whether people consider a text or a call a bigger intrusion on their day. So I know I've flipped over in the last year and a half, right? I really feel a text is less intrusive now. So this is one possibility. When I think about doing this on a large scale with a lot of people, there's a question of, is this going to become intrusive? If it's not just a bounded session where we're asking somebody to come talk to us for an hour, but we're talking about texting them for a couple of weeks, sending them on little missions, we definitely have to watch ourselves and follow our ethical practices in terms of how much is it okay to take from somebody who's agreed to share a little piece of their life with you, right? Like, that's always a privilege that shouldn't be abused. But if we've gotten past the stage where the web form is a horror show and it takes 5 minutes to get through the 3-question survey, which did anybody take my 3-question survey? Thank you, Bryn. Okay, so that one hopefully was pretty quick. That's a very modern form made with Wufoo. It should have taken less than 30 seconds, which I think is something of a limit for people when they get a prompt to do something. However, the one in the original Happiness Project would often take 4 or 5 or 6 minutes, and that's where a lot of the abandons come from. There are more and more things being developed. There's another mobile form application that I'm really excited about that's in beta soon, I believe, called Typeform, that promises to make more customizable and beautiful mobile form, mobile response experiences available, which is something that as researchers we can take and really craft our surveys, if you want to call the little responsive surveys, everything that we present to the participant into a pleasant and humane experience for them to potentially share with us on some pretty significant questions. So it's an enormously exciting time for not just researching mobile, but researching people. And part of that is due to what we complain about sometimes, which is that enmeshment with this device, which is that fact that, I feel a little uncomfortable if my phone is over there and I'm over here. But because of that, if someone reaches out to me through this medium and it's easy to respond, I may be open to answering a lot of kinds of respectful questions. And it's a camera. So the power of photographs is, pretty well known to everybody. But every single one of these photographs was an add-on to a study that happened on the phone. We did regular textual interviewing, and then at the end we said, hey, is your phone with you right now? Your other phone? And people said yes. And we said, well, if you're in your workspace, could you just snap a picture and email it over to the address that I confirmed your interview from? And with that 5 seconds of interaction and the fact that their phone was there and that their phone is able to send a picture from the same place that they take it, we're able to add just a little tiny layer of richness on top of what would have been a study where we didn't have visual. This is one of my favorites. I'm really into the civic space. And this is something that was developed by the Code for America Philadelphia Fellows in 2012. And it is a civic research and citizen response app for cities. And the prompt for it is a poster. So you don't even have to have a smartphone. The city doesn't have to have your number. but it asks a research question out in the world in a physical space where you are, and if you're so inclined, you can answer that by texting a number with the simple capability that your phone has. So imagining even beyond these devices, if we wanted to do really general research, which I think very possibly we do, about certain questions, if we wanted to do something like the bathroom wall where you used to have people write on that poster that you put up, you can have it be more private. If you're able to post up saying, this is the question that we're researching, just grab your phone for a second and send us a 2-word text saying yes, no, or I prefer this. Text-to-Zen is rolling out, I think, in more and more cities. And it's conceived as, again, primarily a civic app, but you can imagine something like this for research. The cool thing about it, it's probably not scientific, right? So it's people who choose to respond, it's people who happen to see the poster, it's people who have their phone on them. But on the other hand, it may be people who would never choose to come to a meeting, who would never choose to write a letter, and who would be able to respond to this type of research because they happen to have a phone on their person. What can we do with that as researchers? Probably a lot. And the one challenge that I hope all of you will take away from tonight is that researching on mobile isn't just about researching the apps that live on our phones. What can you do with these little devices that are connected to people this way? If there's a research question that you have that seems impossible to figure out how to ask, the answer might very well be in here right now. And I think that is pretty cool. So I hope we'll have a bit of a discussion. Yeah.
Wait.
Oh.
In order to be able to capture the voices of all the participants for the future podcast, we ask that
No
that
problem.
person be identified by you, but then we bring them on a microphone.
Hi, and thanks.
Hey.
Wonderful presentation.
Thanks.
And I love the idea of using it as a platform for research as well. But I have a question that's kind of back more towards the usability of the
Absolutely.
apps. So I work for an enterprise level company, and we have native apps on the phone themselves. And one of the challenges I've been really faced with is we, in the development, and even in the prototyping cycle, getting this app to a remote user, and getting the prototype, let's say a PDF or a balsamic kind of click through.
Yep.
But then being able to take it back. We don't want these to live out, we don't want them to escape our control. We don't want them going out into the world. And
Right.
have you run across any type of tool that would allow me to get an app natively onto the phone, or even a PDF, like somehow get a PDF to the phone that they could click through as part of the usability study?
Right. I don't know how to get a PDF off of someone's phone once it's there. I suspect you could use a system akin to TestFlight to kind of have. Do you know TestFlight?
I haven't seen it yet.
It's an
no.
iOS system for putting prototypes that are not yet in the App Store onto people's phones and letting you control the builds that go out to the user base. So people have to sign up. It's pretty secure. And then you can say, okay, we're releasing this build. This is available to you. And then maybe you release a kill build that.
Oh, a kill build. Oh, that's an
something
interesting idea.
Of that nature. I haven't seen that done, but that would be my guess as to how you might
Okay.
make another elegant hack to get that
Excellent.
taken care
Thank
of.
you.
That's important. Yeah. Thanks.
You showed some interesting usage of video to get the context of use in the car and the Best Buy experience.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how you go about getting consent if you're going to be doing a lot of video in public spaces.
So in both those cases, we got consent from the person who was the agreed participant. The car participants were arranged far in advance. They agreed to a 2-hour session, which started at their home and then went on a trip that they had already planned. In the case of the big box store, we did recruit some of those people on the spot, but we didn't do any stealth observing. So You can do video blurring of other people who would object to being in a video, and I think that study actually contained one person who was a friend of the person who agreed to do the study who really didn't want to be in a video, even for the purposes that we were using it. So one thing is in your consent form, you want to state up front, this is going to be viewed by an internal team of 5 researchers and 5 product managers. It's not going to be placed anywhere. And you'll see, you know, I had one still shot of the gentleman with the dog in the car, and I had no video shots of the big box store because that was part of the agreement. But was there more to your question?
What if the places are getting more public?
Like on the street? I think in a public place, you don't have an expectation that you will not be videotaped. So let me repeat that. He asked, what if it's more public? So in a public place like a public street, I don't think you have an expectation that you won't be videotaped or photographed. And you should obviously keep your focus on the person that you're doing the research with, but anybody who walks through the frame is just experiencing being on a public street. Yes?
Just to provide another idea for the person who asked about how to do a usability study and have control over what you're showing, one thing that I have done in the past is used a private photo stream. So give them the URL, create an individual photo stream for that participant. They click on it, I send that link to them at the beginning of the study. It's the same swiping sort of thing that you discussed earlier in an album. So it's not perfect, but it gives you control over that, and then you delete the photo stream when the study is completed.
So you kind of take the admin hit.
Correct.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
It's just not really a question, just also a suggestion or other ideas too. I actually work for Citrix, so I work on GoToMeeting.
Excellent.
It does actually.
Thank you for
not a
presentations
problem.
from
It's
tablets.
my pleasure.
Yeah.
Does also work with a number of document cameras like Wolf Vision's. A number, I don't know about all of them, but certainly some. We've used that in the past sometimes as still somewhat in their way. You just tell them to keep it within the defined boundaries of the document camera, but it kind of helps, keep the tablet up on the table, and still allows for the natural interactions, but you can still kind of see what they're doing. Just something that's worked for us in the past.
So that's another in our category of pretty robust hacks where you can have your document camera, you can have your boundary. I mean, I sometimes make a really informal boundary with a few colored Post-it notes and just say, keep your screen in this square.
Hi. I just had another tip
There you
as
are.
well. I've done a few mobile tests and labs, along with adjusting the brightness of the settings. I'd also recommend adjusting the sort of sleep settings, because there's just been so many times when it just goes to sleep and it goes to the lock screen or whatever, so it might be a handy tip
While
for
you're
y'all.
talking to the person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is an excellent pro tip. I love this.
One other option for a prototype where you maintain control, we've used InVision app, which is basically creating click-through screens. So instead of a PDF simple prototype, you basically draw squares on your images and tell them how to link to each other, and then you can give them a link on their phone and then take the prototype down when you're done, so it won't be accessible afterwards.
This is great.
Hi.
Hi.
With the kind of text prompts where you're asking people just throughout the day to answer certain questions, I'd imagine it varies between studies, but have you found like there's like a certain amount of questions you can ask before a person starts getting like a little annoyed or unresponsive or?
Yeah, I mean, if the response is painful, right? The Happiness Project was only doing 2 prompts a day, and they had an enormous dropout rate because of the slowness of the web forms that existed at that time. So, my guess would be, again, it's going to depend on the population. So who are you recruiting? If you were recruiting people in the teens or early 20s who are native texters and text a lot, they might not mind 4 prompts a day if it's something quick. If you're recruiting people who are more in my age range, you might need to back off to 1 or 2. I would say for a quick mobile survey that's meant to be done on the fly that might have interrupted you in a public place, you probably want to keep it under 4 questions, and most of them not require much typing. So that's something of a limitation on what you can ask.
Hi,
Hi.
I was wondering, how do you determine compensation for something like a 2-week experience sampling study? Do you go by how often you prompt them, or what? Do you have ideas there?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I mean, they're not spending the concentrated time with you, right, that would give you a $100 Amazon gift certificate for this hour, but they're letting you spend some time in their own doing an interruption of their lives is a little more. So I would say, if it's, if you the height of your expectations and the level of direction that you provide would, if you expect people to remember to do something every day themselves, let's say, and they actually do it and they do it well, that would raise it over, okay, I'm going to text you once a day and you responded almost all of those days. In a commercial space, I'm going to guess you wouldn't want to pay somebody much less than $100 for kind of paying attention to your thing for 2 weeks. But that's probably pretty variable depending on population. And, I always note that certain populations, doctors, for example, will require a really high incentive to just make it worth their time.
There's probably regional differences inside the U.S. and stuff like that.
Definitely, and then there are some things that people are glad to help out. And the promise from the Happiness Project originally was pretty compelling. We'll tell you the data about your happiness. Hi.
Hi, Sid. Could you point to any industry standard data about things like how many people are typing with their left hand, with their right hand, with both hands? How many are holding it in one hand and typing with the other?
I don't have the answer to that. That's a great question, and I don't know where that data is. I wish I did. Yeah. Steve.
Just quick on the incentive thing, and you probably can answer this better. I'm just thinking about like combinations of incentives. If it's you're getting people for a week, and you have a panel of 20 people, and you're sending them these things, and maybe you draw a bonus $100 gift card. So that there's a way to kind of, everything you said is right, and then can you add on to that maybe some mitigating or enthusiasm-inducing types of things, sort of be creative and fun about it to create that kind of relationship that you were talking about.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi again.
Hi again.
I was just curious, with the new technologies
Yeah.
enhancing old methods like diary studies and,
Right.
it seems like there's going to be ubiquitous or a large amount of data coming in. Have you identified any type of new synthesis methods, or do you still use traditional ethnographic synthesis methods to kind of go through and codify or understand the data?
I use pretty traditional synthesis methods myself. I focus on metaphor and try and find correlations. There are great tools for synthesizing more quantitative types of data.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay.
But I really feel like the best new tool, and maybe somebody's going to come out with one over here too. We can do great Wordles for qualitative data, but that's a very shallow level of analysis compared to what you can do by going through and actually doing it. D-Scout has a little bit of a back end, but I think that may be where things go next is, okay, I can collect this volume of data for 20 people over 2 weeks and I can ping them a couple of times a day. Something that helps you discover those correlations would be really, really welcome. Because I know that stack of data, looking at that is a moment of, okay. Does anybody have one of those? The synthesis apps or methods?
Hi, Sid.
Hey.
MaxQDA actually has a mobile app that they recently released, and it's a qualitative software. So it's got video, photo, and you can actually type text into it all in one.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks for coming. That's Code for America 2013 in the house.
Woohoo!
They said, I'm part of the quantified self group, and we actually have a couple of different apps that people have been releasing that are completely quant focused, but I was literally writing a tweet when you said that of, I'm hearing the exact same thing in QS of, God, we've got a lot of data, how do we analyze it? And you just said that, and so it was an interesting parallel.
Yeah.
We're focused more on numbers, obviously.
Right, but the same thing happens with qualitative. If I've got 1,200 statements from people, that's an enormous volume to go through and categorize, and God, what do we do with it? I mean, we just do the work, and we look for those shortcuts that our brain offers us, like metaphor, as we get immersed in the data. But yeah, this is big data, and how to work with it is definitely one of the challenges the next couple of years.
Yeah, my big suggestion would just be find ways to pair the two. So what some people will see is, like, if you're tracking weight and eating, for example, look for the days where, oh wow, your weight shot up, and then look at the log, your diary that says, what did you do, why did you eat, oh, you got really depressed. That's what caused that. So you don't have to read every single diary, you use the numbers to find the outliers.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
All right, I'll make a challenging
please.
comment. You were saying several times during the talk that you felt the two hardest things were composing the prompts and collecting the data. Is that a fair restatement of what you said?
That is fair. I did label it oversimplification alert.
Oh, yes. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Well, I was just thinking, what would my oversimplified version of what the hardest things about research are? And I'm always saying to people, the hardest thing is choosing the right question, asking a good question, which isn't quite the same as composing the prompt. It's sort of the question for the client rather than for the participant. And then recruiting, knowing that you've recruited the right people, which you did refer to earlier too, where the right people means, enough to satisfy me as the researcher and to satisfy the stakeholders that we've covered their top candidates, their key customers or categories of their market segmentation, which has nothing to do with behavioral kinds of categories, but you have to, pay attention to it nonetheless, because they won't believe the results unless you've done something toward that.
Right.
Compare and contrast.
Okay. So I do think both of those things are hard. I think that, recruiting is one of the great disciplines of our field, and doing it well is a definite challenge. When I wrote this, which I wrote on purpose to get someone to challenge me a bit at least, I was thinking about, what are those things that are keeping me up about the logistics? And the difficulty with that is, if you break it all down, what will arrive, what won't arrive, what will work, what won't work, the pieces of that are, I've got to get them whatever stimulus I have, and I've got to be able to either talk to them or deliver them my questions in some other fashion. And if I lose the data collection, which I'm sure is an experience that everybody in this room has had at least once, where video crashed, the notebook burned, I don't know what happened, you've all had it happen once. It's
the dog ate my computer.
Right, yes, exactly. You've lost all day. But I agree with you that, if you don't have the right questions, if you don't have the right goals, and if you don't have the right people, your research is going to be fairly worthless. So, excellent success factors, yes.
What do you look for in recruiting people?
Specifically for mobile or just in general?
Well, yeah, if you want to answer it for both mobile
Okay.
and like traditional web.
So my biggest factors on recruiting people are some kind of demographic match, especially if the client requires one, but more importantly, a task match. So someone who cares about the thing that I'm going to be researching is very, very important. People who talk reasonably well and somebody who has compatible technology with whatever I'm using. For mobile, the compatible technology piece comes in a little bigger. For some of these diary study type of things, it might not be so important that they're able to kind of, sustain an out loud conversation over 30 or 45 minutes. But the single most important thing to me is a task match, and if at all possible, a time match. So if I can be with someone at the time that they actually want to do the thing, that is going to give me them in a very different mindset than if we're sort of simulating the desire to go on a trip to the dog park in the car example, or buy a laptop in a typical website study example. If I catch that person at the moment that they need to do that, which is one reason I am a fan of live recruiting and intercepts if you are comfortable with the uncertainty for it. Chris.
Hi. So I guess I have a question about circumstances and ecosystems.
Okay.
I don't know how possible this is or if you can even get good data out of this, but my first thought was like, oh, I have a bunch of devices and I sort of expect my data to go between all these devices. But I imagine that actually most people probably don't have many devices in the world.
Probably not as many as you.
Not as many as me.
Yeah.
So the thing that might happen in the world, though, is that people share devices. They may have an iPad that's shared by the family, for example. And so
Yes.
I'm wondering how you deal with that kind of reality where, you're asking them about sharing to a social network like Facebook and, their mom's logged in or something, and that's awkward. Like, how do you sort of mitigate against reality, or do you? And how do those things sort of affect the success of your application or studies? You know what I mean? Or like in the cooking illustrated example, you had to log in. Well, there's that whole aspect of, well, does the person remember their password and the reset thing? And on mobile, it's terrible. So I don't know what's going on,
So I have to tell you, those pieces of reality, I don't try that hard to mitigate because that is what actually using this stuff is like. If your mom might be logged in, awkward, didn't want to see that picture of mom. Whatever it is, you have to log in.
I wasn't going to go there, but okay.
Yeah. That's really important information for the researcher, that the person has to log in and has trouble remembering their password. I would never want to give that up for the smoothness of a session. At the same time, for some of those sharing applications that you're talking about where people might have a joint iPad or something like that, I will still say householding has been one of the biggest problems since the 90s when I was working at Charles Schwab, in terms of people who have some joint data and some individual data and share devices or accounts or things like that. In some situations, it would make sense to recruit them together if you are actually trying to understand that issue. And in fact, I've seen a couple of circumstances recently where it made sense to create personas that were not individuals but were groups because the target was so much around those shared realities. So I hope that answers that. Don't close reality out of your sessions if you can avoid it.
Hi, just curious to know, what kind of research and testing goes in designing apps for children, kids, because they are the important users as well of the mobile phones.
Yes, very similar types of research and testing, and it requires an extra layer of consent, of course, because of under 13 in this country is a special protected category, and so you need to work with the parents as well. So dealing with incentives and kids and making sure that you're doing things that families are comfortable with can be a challenge. Recruiting kids for really sensitive topics is very hard, but things like games, it's not that hard to do. There are agencies that specialize in it. That's something that's sometimes effective to work through social networks. If you have friends who are parents of particular ages of kids and they have friends, so that trust thread kind of goes through. Who is this person who wants to observe my kid? I don't know if I want my kid exposed to marketing. If you can make personal connections, I think when you're recruiting children, it can help a lot. But I think very similarly to with an adult app, you want to see the person who's actually going to use it, trying to use it.
in your recruiting, and I guess it depends on the study, but how much have you tried to stick with a particular type of phone? Or you said, kind of as long as you have iOS and as long as you have Android. My experience is I've been finding, I don't know, either people want to get into studies or sometimes they end up with all sorts of different devices when I didn't intend to. Well, occasionally. And something that's coming up more is like when we're doing research on tablets, there's so many different sizes and that can make a big difference to the experience people have. So I was wondering if you've been getting into that at all.
Yes. So, it's funny, I'm friends with the president of OTIVO who really feels that everybody should test on a wide range of devices even when they're doing usability, which I still will stand by the idea that ideally you should pick a couple that are pretty representative of strong populations and recruit towards those if you can. And then if you end up with some others, or if people that you recruit didn't know correctly what actual system they had, or which specific model of phone they had, it's okay. I feel like, operating significantly differently on different devices is closer to a QA issue, even though it impacts the usability for the person. And that doesn't mean we should leave it alone. But how doing the thing on the device fits into the person's life is likely not that affected by which device they choose to have. Your mileage may vary, and we may all find out differently this year. But
so you listed a lot of the advantages to using mobile devices for collecting responses or prompting people.
Uh-huh.
I'm just wondering, are there any disadvantages that you see to traditional methods that we should be aware of?
I do think it's real that it's more intrusive, and that's its power as well. So, getting a text message is more intrusive than getting an email on my computer, is more intrusive than having a nice little letter reminder or a blog that reminds me to do. But it's also more immediate. So that may lead to people doing less in some circumstances. If it's carefully constructed, it may lead to people doing more. So one of the things is, with one of these new areas and a bunch of new methods coming in, doing your dry runs and multiple plural dry runs with maybe 2 or 3 people similar to your participants before you put this stuff out into the wild, and trying it out yourself. This is one thing I do whenever I hear of one of these new apps and I think it sounds cool, I'd like to use it. I'll be a participant in a fake study a couple of times and see, well, what is that experience like? If it seems reasonable to me, try it out on a couple people who are not going to be in the study but are similar to the target population, to try and mitigate that. I think that for some people, traditional methods do feel richer. So if you're sending out a cultural probe or something, people may feel like there's more richness to real artifacts and more connection to things that they handwrite in a journal that you've prepared or something like that. But that, again, is going to depend on population and age and a couple of things like that.
Is there some sort of standard upper limit you've noticed for the amount of text that someone's willing to write back to you before it's intolerable?
I don't think we have that yet. I know we have that right for like a usability session. It's like the butt is tired after 50 minutes and the brain is tired. I think I have sensible guesses, but I don't think we really know that across time. I would guess, again, if you're pinging somebody more than 3 or 4 times in a day, it better be really, really light. And especially, it probably depends what time of day. It's like if it's at work, okay, I'm busy, but if you're invading my family time, like those need to be really light and judicious.
How much will they text back to you?
a quick sentence unless they're really exercised about something. And if you can focus the question as much as possible so that it says, you can say yes, you can say no, you can say, I need to know what color the thing that you're looking at right now is. It's a word, great. The easier it is to do, the more people will do something that they aren't personally passionate about. And if they're personally passionate and you catch them at the right time, you may get a whole lot back. I'm on Muni. I'd be happy to share pictures of how stuck I am and what is going on. Yes?
When you're recruiting for those back and forth texting type research, do you ever have to take into account participants who have like a limited texting plan, or those who are reluctant to send? I don't know how the limited ones work. I have unlimited myself.
Yeah.
But, that might hinder their ability to respond either per day or overall if they hit
so
the
I
limit.
haven't done as much with having the answer come by text so much as sending out a prompt with a link so that it doesn't hit their texting. The obvious thing to do is to take care of it in the incentive so that you can pay them enough to cover any extra hit to their texting plan that they need for that month, and then a little. But that's a really important concern, and that was one of the things that the folks who made Text-to-Zen thought about, was they didn't want their participants to have to receive prompts because you might have to pay for those as well. And a lot of the people who would be waiting at bus stops and seeing the posters would likely be on plans where that would be an issue.
In the same vein, with texting, I'm wondering for the coding that you're doing, if you've had to do anything special to account for abbreviations or different ways. So, if you might be looking for keywords or things, being able to understand how many variations you might have to look for based on somebody texting and having shortcuts.
Yeah. That's probably one reason why we don't have a great synthesis helper yet, is it's introduced a bunch more variations in language. So that's a really good point.
I had a question about the UX recorder.
Uh-huh.
Do you know if it works if you could just do a screen record, not the picture-in-picture thing, the picture-in-picture video?
Just the screen?
Mm-hmm. Or if there's an alternative?
There are a couple of alternatives, and that will show you the gestures on a mobile website without the front-facing camera. Someone just pointed out to me one that's in beta right now called Klue, K-L-U-E, which does a very similar thing but doesn't use the front-facing camera. I am not sure if you can turn it off in UX Recorder. I have it on my phone. I'd be happy to check for you.
While we're moving the microphone over there, let me ask the three-part thing, which is all one. Accessibility, literacy, multilingualism.
Yes.
You understand why that's all one, right?
It's absolutely, yes, no, and the more and more work I'm doing in the civic space, where things need to serve everyone, these things are really important. Mobile phones are actually a pretty amazing accessibility technology in their own right, and they can allow people with certain kinds of accessibility needs to do a lot of things that are harder through other means. Accessibility to research, you said accessibility, literacy, and multilingualism.
Multilingualism.
Yeah. So multilingualism, you basically have to handle the same way you do in a different medium of study. You have to provide the prompts in the language that a person can speak if you want to research them, and that the person can read and respond in. You have to deal with translation. If you've got people responding in multiple languages, there isn't a whole lot of a way around it. For accessibility, I always find it really interesting to see what kinds of accommodations people are using to ameliorate particular issues that they have or where those fall down. So I think that not every study takes account of those in specific, but one of the most interesting things about those pieces is that often accommodations designed to serve somebody with a particular disability or difference or need end up being the things that are incredibly helpful to everybody. So I always find it really interesting to find those out. You know, if you think of the curb cuts for wheelchairs that ended up making everyone's strollers and wheelie bags roll through the whole city, which I don't think was what the architects of the ADA expected, but it's wonderful for all of us. So I think that, you know, the more that we can assist people who need any sort of accommodation, the more likely we are to serve everyone better. Literacy in a text-based medium is tough, but if someone is confident in texting on their own, I think it's our job as researchers to figure out how to work with them.
Have you done any research in the quantitative nature? For example, measuring the performance of the mobile product against the UX metrics? And if you have, what kind of tools do you use to capture the data?
I have not done, my practice is almost entirely qualitative, so I don't have much information on how to set that up.
You might have mentioned it along the way, but you talked a lot about, you know, leveraging the technologies inside the phones to test the users. I'm curious as to if the tech savviness of the user is actually influencing the research on that part. And do you have any examples for that?
Yeah, it can. So that's a good point. That, you know, people who are tech savvy may be able to participate differently in a particular research method than people who are less tech savvy. And again, I think that's on us as researchers to design for the people whose lives we want a little window into. So to design the research itself, if we have folks who are working with feature phones, then that's what we need to set up our research for, even if it's difficult for us. I just entirely think that's on us. Way in the back.
Oh, sorry, it's really boomy.
It's all good.
I had a question about kind of just spontaneity, since, you know, these are all very versatile machines, and, you know, people are using them whenever they do or do not expect. I'm curious, beyond kind of the text probes or the text prompts and maybe kind of like diary type studies, are there any other methods you've tried that kind of give feedback on, you know, what people are spontaneously using or misusing their phone for?
So those, I think, require the intensive method of being with the person and doing it ethnographically.
Right.
At present, there are probably some ways to, you know, get some history files or something from somebody's phone.
Yeah.
But, you know, but then you don't get what happened that prompted whatever the incident was. Or so I think that, you know, there's a lot we can do with the prompts, but we're still dependent on ethnography. We want to actually see things happen.
Hi. There was a slide that had pictures of people's work or home environments.
Yeah.
Were there any cases that you ever had where you gleaned valuable information from that, or is it just like good supporting information?
There have been instances where we've gleaned valuable information. The classic one being somebody's Post-it note of their passwords. And the valuable information to us not being the password themselves, but the fact that they had to do that because they had so many passwords.
And the study had to do with passwords, or was that just like?
It didn't. Well, the study had to do with an app that had a password. Okay. And so the realization that this, you know, the context the person was in was that they were beset by passwords was useful to know for designing the thing.
And that's not necessarily mobile specific.
No, not
right.
at all.
Because I mean, I'm thinking of an instance like that where we photographed a bunch of people in an office environment all using the same app, which was not mobile. And to a person, I think everybody in the smaller offices had a physical Rolodex on their desk. Now, I would bet nobody in this room has a Rolodex that they use except a historical one. Do you know what that is, even? Oh. Anyway, so that was a clear difference. We are not our users, you know, if everybody's got Rolodexes.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Wore 'em down, all right.
Ping me if you'd like more, and thanks so much.
You may approach Sid personally.